Have you ever been pushed too far by someone in power? Someone who thought they could just walk all over you because they had a fancy title or a bit of local clout? Well, I certainly have. My name is Arthur Jenkins, and when the puffed-up HOA president of my new lakeside community ordered me to get rid of my late wife's beloved sailboat, he genuinely had no idea what hornet's nest he was kicking. He thought I was just some grieving old man he could easily intimidate. He was wrong. Stick around, because this is the story of how one completely unreasonable aesthetic violation led to me, quite legally, fencing off the entire community marina they all depended on. It's a bit of a tale, so grab a coffee. And hey, while you're settling in, where are you folks watching from today? I always find it fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Drop a comment below. I'd love to know. It all started about 6 months after Eleanor passed. The silence in our old house, the house we'd shared for 43 years, had become a physical weight, pressing down on me. Our children were grown, living their own lives miles away. So, I sold up and bought a smaller place in Lakeside Haven, a community nestled around a picturesque man-made lake. It had a small, private dock attached to the property, which was the main selling point. That dock was for Serenity, Eleanor's 30-foot sailboat. She wasn't new, nor particularly grand by the standards of some of the newer, flashier vessels I'd seen bobbing in the larger community marina, but Eleanor had loved her. We'd spent countless weekends on her, exploring coastlines and inland waterways before her illness made it impossible. Serenity was more than just a boat. She was a repository of memories, a connection to the best years of my life. My plan was simple: quiet days, maybe a bit of fishing, and keeping Serenity in good trim, just as Eleanor would have wanted. The first few weeks were peaceful enough. I kept to myself, mostly. Grief isn't a social animal. I attended one HOA meeting out of a sense of civic duty, a rather dreary affair presided over by a man named Preston Holloway. He was, I suppose, in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a way that screamed old money. Even if it was new golf club membership, he had a booming voice, a condescending smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and an air of absolute authority that seemed to cow the other board members into quiet subservience. He spoke at length about maintaining standards and property values, his gaze sweeping over the attendees as if daring anyone to challenge him. I remember thinking he was precisely the sort of man I'd spent my career tactfully navigating around. The kind whose ego was inversely proportional to their actual competence. I made a mental note to avoid him. That plan, however, was not to be. About a month after that meeting, an official-looking envelope arrived. It was from the Lakeside Haven Homeowners Association, signed by Preston Holloway himself. The letter was curt, bordering on rude. It stated that my boat, Serenity, had been found to be in violation of newly amended Aesthetic Guideline 73B, which apparently dictated the acceptable age, condition, and overall luxury class of vessels moored within the community, even on private docks, if visible from common areas. My boat, it declared, was not in keeping with the community's desired visual standards. I was instructed to remove Serenity from my dock, and indeed from Lakeside Haven entirely, within 30 days. Failure to comply would result in daily fines, followed by forced removal at my expense. I read the letter twice, and a third time. A cold fury, an emotion I hadn't felt with such intensity since Eleanor's diagnosis, began to burn through the fog of my grief. Serenity was meticulously maintained. Her bright work gleamed. Her sails were perfectly furled, her hull sound. She wasn't a dilapidated wreck. She was a classic, cared-for sailboat. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was about power. This was Holloway throwing his weight around. He wants to dictate what I can keep on my own property, tied to my own dock. He wants to take away one of the last tangible links I have to my wife. The answer to that was a resounding, internal no. My initial shock and anger soon gave way to a grim sort of determination. Holloway had underestimated me. He saw a quiet, grieving widower, perhaps an easy mark. He didn't see Arthur Jenkins, retired senior land acquisition manager and former registered surveyor. For over 30 years, I'd navigated the labyrinthine world of property rights, deeds, easements, and zoning laws for a major infrastructure company. I dealt with far more formidable opponents than a petty HOA president drunk on his own perceived importance. He wants to play by the rules? Fine, I thought, a spark of my old professional self igniting. Let's see who understands the rules better. That evening, instead of staring blankly at the television, I went into the spare room that served as my study. From a sturdy wooden chest, I retrieved my old surveying tools, a transit, a steel tape, ranging poles, and more importantly, the detailed plot plan and deed for my Lakeside Haven property. I spread them out on the large desk, the familiar scent of old paper and drafting ink a strange comfort. For hours, I pored over the documents, cross-referencing them with the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions CC and RS that had come with the house. The CC and RS were dense, full of legalese, but no more complex than contracts I dissected 1,000 times. There was indeed a vaguely worded clause about maintaining community aesthetic standards, but nothing that specifically gave them the right to ban a well-maintained boat from a private dock, especially one grandfathered in before any supposed new amendment. The newly amended guideline he'd quoted sounded suspiciously like something railroaded through without proper notification or voting, something Holloway was known for, according to whispers I'd picked up. But then, as I traced the boundaries of my property on the plot plan, my eyes caught something peculiar. My lot was irregularly shaped, not a neat rectangle like most of the others. There was a thin, almost overlooked strip of land, no more than 20 feet wide, that extended from the northwest corner of my main property line. It ran alongside the access road to the community marina, separating that road from a parcel of undeveloped woodland. According to my deed and the accompanying meets and bounds description, that strip was unequivocally mine. It wasn't an easement granted to me. It was fee simple ownership. It appeared to be an old access remnant, perhaps from a previous subdivision of the land before Lakeside Haven was even conceived. The community marina, a key selling point for half the properties in Lakeside Haven, was accessed by a single paved road. And that road, for a crucial stretch of about 200 feet leading directly to the marina entrance, appeared to be bordered on one side entirely by my 20-foot wide strip of land. Interesting, I thought, a slow smile spreading across my face. Very interesting indeed. My preliminary thought was, if they push me on serenity, perhaps I have a point of leverage regarding access they haven't considered. The next morning, I drove into town and paid a visit to the county records office. I spent the better part of the day meticulously tracing the chain of title for my property and, crucially, for the land upon which the community marina and its access road were built. It was painstaking work, sifting through dusty ledgers and microfilm, but it was familiar territory. By late afternoon, I had my answer, and it was even better than I'd hoped. The Lakeside Haven HOA owned the land the marina itself sat on, and they had a clear easement for the majority of the access road. However, for that critical 200-foot stretch leading directly to the marina gate, the strip of land alongside it, my strip, was the only piece of land that provided legal frontage for that section of the road. The original developers, in their haste or oversight decades ago, had never formally acquired an easement over that specific section of what was now my property to guarantee access, nor had they purchased the strip itself. They'd simply paved a road that, for a short but vital section, effectively relied on the goodwill or ignorance of the owner of my parcel. The HOA, it seemed, had been trespassing on the edge of my land to facilitate wider access, or at least operating under a very precarious, unwritten assumption for years. Armed with this knowledge, my resolve hardened. I wasn't just going to fight the boat issue. I was going to ensure Holloway and his cronies understood the concept of respecting boundaries, both literal and figurative. But I needed allies, or at least a clearer picture of the local sentiment. I started by striking up conversations with other boat owners at the community marina. It wasn't hard. Holloway's overreach was a common grumble. I met Maria Sanchez, a retired teacher whose small fishing boat had recently been slapped with a violation for having a non-regulation color bimini top. And Tom Henderson, a younger man with a family who was being hassled about the type of trailer he used for his ski boat even though he only brought it to the launch ramp and never parked it long-term. They were frustrated, feeling powerless. When I subtly hinted that I was looking into the HOA's authority on such matters, their ears perked up. They didn't know about my land discovery yet. I was keeping that ace up my sleeve. My most valuable connection, however, came unexpectedly. I was examining some old town survey maps at the local historical society when an elderly gentleman with bright, curious eyes approached me. "You seem mighty interested in those old lines, son," he said, his voice raspy with age. He introduced himself as Silas Blackwood, a retired land surveyor himself, and a lifelong resident of the county. He knew the history of Lakeside Haven's development like the back of his hand. When I, without revealing my full hand, inquired about the original land grants and rights-of-way around the lake, Silas's eyes lit up. He confirmed my findings about the strip of land. "Oh, that old access spur," he chuckled. "Caused a bit of a fuss back in the 70s when they were planning the Marina. Old man Hemlock owned your parcel then. He was a stubborn coot. Never would sell that strip or grant a formal easement. So they could drive past it, but not on it or over it without his say-so. After he passed, I guess everyone just forgot. Or hoped it wouldn't matter." Silas, with his encyclopedic knowledge of local land history and a mischievous glint in his eye, quickly became an invaluable sounding board and a quiet co-conspirator. He even dug up copies of old correspondence between the original developers and Mr. Hemlock, further cementing my position. Meanwhile, Holloway wasn't idle. The 30-day deadline for Serenity's removal was approaching. Another letter arrived, this one even more imperious, detailing the escalating daily fines I would incur, now set at a ludicrous $50 a day. He'd even taken to making snide remarks if he saw me from a distance, loud enough for others to hear. "Some people just can't accept progress," he'd bellow to one of his bored sycophants, nodding in my direction. "Refuse to maintain standards. Drags the whole community down." His arrogance was breathtaking, but it was also his weakness. He was so convinced of his own authority, so dismissive of me, that he couldn't imagine I'd have any meaningful way to resist. He was, in essence, digging his own hole deeper with every smug pronouncement. Maria and Tom reported that Holloway was boasting at informal gatherings about how he was finally cleaning up the riffraff and making Lakeside Haven exclusive again. The pressure was mounting, but so was my confidence. With Silas's historical backup and the clear legal standing of my deed, I consulted an old friend, a sharp property lawyer named Ben Carter, who I'd worked with for years. I laid out the whole situation, Holloway's harassment over Serenity, and my discovery about the Marina access strip. Ben listened intently, a slow grin spreading across his face as I explained the implications of my land ownership. "Arthur," he said, after reviewing the documents I faxed him, "this isn't just a defensive position, it's a checkmate if played correctly. Holloway has massively overplayed his hand. Together, we formulated the plan. It was audacious, but legally sound. First, I would send a polite, registered letter to the HOA and Mr. Holloway, formally disputing the violation notice regarding Serenity, citing the lack of specific, pre-existing, and properly ratified regulations that would apply to my boat on my private dock. I would also, in the same letter, inform them that I was aware of the precise boundaries of my property, including the 20-foot strip adjacent to the Marina access road, and that I intended to secure my property against unauthorized use. I wouldn't explicitly state I was fencing off the Marina access yet, just that I was securing my land. Let them wonder. The second part of the plan was the real masterstroke. Ben advised that I should, just before the HOA's threatened deadline for Serenity's removal, legally and physically assert my ownership of that strip. This meant erecting a fence along my property line, a fence that would effectively cut off all vehicular access to the community marina. Once the fence was up, I would then be in a position to negotiate with the HOA from a position of undeniable strength, not just about Serenity, but about a formal, paid easement for marina access, the proceeds of which could be directed towards actual community benefits, not Holloway's vanity projects. Let's see how important aesthetic guidelines are when half the residents can't get to their expensive toys, Ben had said with a chuckle. Holloway, as expected, reacted to my letter with predictable bluster. He didn't reply directly to me. Instead, he called an emergency HOA board meeting, the main agenda item, according to the hastily posted notice, being action regarding non-compliant resident and unauthorized vessel. He was clearly doubling down, intending to make an example of me. Maria called me, her voice worried. Arthur, he's furious. He's telling everyone you're a troublemaker, and that the board has voted to have Serenity forcibly removed next Tuesday if it's not gone by Monday evening. He's even arranged for a crane and a flatbed. I thanked her for the information, a calm settling over me. Holloway was walking right into the trap. The stakes were certainly higher now. If my plan failed, I'd not only lose Serenity, but also face a mountain of legal fees and community ire. But I trusted my research, my lawyer, and my own resolve. I'd already discreetly contacted a local, reputable fencing company and arranged for them to be on site at dawn on Monday. Monday morning arrived, cool and clear. At precisely 6 a.m., as the first rays of sunlight touched the lake, the fencing company's truck rumbled quietly down my street. I was waiting for them, coffee in hand. The crew, professional and efficient, knew exactly what to do. I'd walked the boundary line with the foreman days before, marking it with small flags, all perfectly aligned with the survey pin Silas, and I had re-verified. They set to work with quiet precision, sinking posts, stretching chain-link fencing. It wasn't a decorative fence. It was a clear, unambiguous statement of ownership. It ran the full 200-foot length of my strip, right along the edge of the paved Marina access road, and then turned at a 90-degree angle, crossing the 20-foot width of my land, effectively blocking the entire roadway entrance to the marina. We installed a sturdy, wide gate in the section that crossed the road, and I secured it with a heavy-duty padlock. On the fence, at regular intervals, I hung professionally printed signs, private property, in no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. Lakeside Haven HOA, take note. This includes access to the marina beyond this point. By 8:30 a.m., the job was done. The fence stood gleaming in the morning sun, an undeniable barrier. I thanked the crew, paid them, and then settled onto my porch with another coffee and the morning paper, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. Around 9:15 a.m., I heard the distinctive rumble of a heavy diesel engine. Peeking through the blinds, I saw Preston Holloway's oversized SUV pull up at the head of the Marina access road, followed by a large tow truck equipped with a crane and a flatbed truck. Holloway got out, beaming. Preening for a couple of his board cronies who had accompanied him for the show, he strode confidently towards the marina entrance, then stopped dead. His jaw literally dropped. The change in his demeanor was instantaneous, from smug triumph to utter, bewildered disbelief. He stared at the fence, then at the signs, then back at the fence. He walked up to it, rattling the gate, his face turning a fascinating shade of puce. "Jenkins," he roared, spotting me on my porch. "What is the meaning of this? You can't do this." He marched towards my property line, his cronies trailing uncertainly behind. I walked calmly to the edge of my lawn. "Mr. Holloway," I said, my voice even, "this is my private property. I've simply chosen to secure it. The signs are quite clear." I held up a copy of my deed and the relevant survey map, which I had laminated. "This strip of land, upon which you are currently trespassing to yell at me, and which provides the only viable vehicular access to your marina, belongs to me. It always has." Holloway sputtered. This is outrageous. An ambush. The HOA has rights. We have an easement." "Actually, you don't," I replied pleasantly. "I've had my attorney review all the county records. There is no recorded easement for this specific section of roadway benefiting the HOA. You and the entire community have been, shall we say, enjoying permissive access across the edge of my land for years, an oversight I am now correcting. As for my boat," I gestured towards Serenity, bobbing gently at her dock. "She's on my private property, and she's staying." The tow truck driver, A burly man who looked like he'd seen his share of bizarre situations leaned out of his cab. A boss? We can't get the rig in there. That fence is blocking the whole road. Holloway looked like he was about to have an apoplexy. Call the police, he shrieked at one of his companions. This is vandalism, obstruction. The police did arrive, two calm officers who listened patiently to Holloway's tirade, then to my quiet explanation, during which I presented my documentation. They examined the deed, the survey map, and the photographs I'd taken of the clearly marked survey pins before the fence went up. After a brief discussion between themselves and a call back to their sergeant, one of them addressed Holloway. Sir, Mr. Jenkins appears to be within his rights. This is clearly his property according to these documents. If you believe you have a legal claim to an easement, that's a civil matter you'll have to take up in court. We can't order him to remove a fence from his own land. With that, they tipped their hats to me and departed, leaving Holloway standing amidst the ruins of his grandstanding. The sight of his face, a mask of impotent fury and public humiliation as other residents began to gather, drawn by the commotion, was, I confess, deeply satisfying. The tow truck and flatbed eventually rumbled away, their mission unaccomplished. News of the Great Marina blockade, as someone cheekily dubbed it, spread through Lakeside Haven like wildfire. My phone started ringing. First Maria, then Tom, both initially incredulous, then jubilant. Arthur, you legend. Tom had shouted into the phone. You actually did it. The local weekly paper, always hungry for a bit of small-town drama, got wind of it, and a reporter called asking for a statement. I politely referred them to my lawyer, Ben, who was more than happy to provide a concise, legally sound explanation of my actions, emphasizing my prior attempts to resolve the issue of Serenity amicably in the HOA's aggressive stance. Holloway, predictably, tried to fight. He had the HOA's lawyer fire off a threatening letter demanding the immediate removal of the fence and threatening a lawsuit for damages due to loss of marina access. Ben's response was swift and brutal, attaching copies of all relevant deeds, surveys, and historical records, along with a counteroffer. I would be willing to discuss granting a formal, paid easement to the HOA, the terms of which would be non-negotiable and would include a permanent, written retraction of all violations and fines against Serenity, and a formal apology from Mr. Holloway for his harassment. The HOA's attempt to get an emergency court injunction to force me to remove the fence failed spectacularly when Ben presented our evidence. The judge, reportedly, had some rather pointed questions for the HOA's counsel regarding their due diligence on property rights. The immediate consequence for Holloway was a complete meltdown of his authority. With the marina inaccessible by car, boat owners couldn't launch or retrieve their vessels. Deliveries of fuel and supplies were impossible. The lucrative holiday weekend boat parade was canceled. An emergency HOA meeting was called, not by Holloway, but by a large group of furious residents. I attended this one, sitting quietly at the back. Holloway tried to bluster his way through, blaming me, calling me an extortionist. But the residents weren't buying it. They had seen the documents, read the newspaper articles. They saw a president whose arrogance and incompetence had led them into this mess. One after another, residents stood up and condemned his leadership, his petty tyrannies, and his fiscal mismanagement that had clearly overlooked such a critical vulnerability. It was a public dressing down of epic proportions. My vindication was complete. Serenity was safe, and I held all the cards. The quiet, grieving widower had found his voice and his footing again. Within a week, Preston Holloway tendered his resignation as HOA president, effective immediately. The remaining board members, humbled and desperate, approached me through Ben to negotiate. The negotiations were brief. They agreed to all my terms. A formal easement was granted to the HOA for marina access across my land, for which they paid a substantial annual fee. This fee, by stipulation in the agreement, was placed into a segregated fund, overseen by a new committee on which I agreed to serve, dedicated solely to actual community improvements and maintenance, not discretionary spending by the board. All notices and fines against Serenity were publicly rescinded, and I received a written apology, albeit a grudging one, from the remnants of the old board on behalf of the HOA. They didn't have much choice. The changes in Lakeside Haven were palpable. With Holloway gone, a new, more reasonable board was elected. Transparency improved. The petty rules and vindictive enforcement actions faded away. The community felt lighter, more neighborly. For me, the victory was more than just saving Serenity or getting one over on a bully. It was about rediscovering a part of myself I thought had faded with Eleanor's passing. My competence, my ability to solve problems, to stand up for what was right. The fight had re-energized me, given me a new sense of purpose. That summer, I even started a small, informal sailing clinic for some of the neighborhood kids, using Serenity as our training vessel. Seeing their joy as they learned to handle the tiller and the sails, feeling the wind in my own face, it was a balm to the soul. Eleanor would have loved it. As for Preston Holloway, his downfall was swift and complete. His reputation in Lakeside Haven, and indeed in the wider local business community where he'd always tried to project an image of power and influence, was shattered. The story of his public humiliation and gross incompetence became something of a local legend. Within a few months, a for sale sign appeared on his lawn. He sold his house at a loss, I heard, and moved away, presumably to find some other unsuspecting community to try and dominate. He never quite understood that true respect is earned, not demanded, and that underestimating the quiet ones can have very tangible, very inconvenient consequences. So, that's the tale of the boat, the fence, and the HOA president who picked the wrong fight. It just goes to show, sometimes the most unassuming people hold the strongest cards, and a little bit of knowledge applied strategically can move mountains, or at least block a marina. It taught me that even in grief, there's strength, and that honoring the memory of a loved one can sometimes mean fighting for the simple things that represent them. In keeping Serenity, I found a new serenity for myself, and perhaps helped make our little corner of the world a slightly fairer place. What do you all think? Is there a moral to this story, or just a bit of satisfying justice? I'm always interested in your reflections. Thanks for listening.